All right, Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to Big Book Compendium. And so today, what I'm doing is I'm hitting bullet points for sponsorship. And I think some of you have heard me do this before. So I go pretty fast. So maybe there's some stuff you missed. So let me explain why I go through the steps quickly to start off with people. It's not to make the person feel rushed. It's strictly for the reason that when a person gets sober, there's a door of motivation that happens that eventually, people start to get stuff back, their kids, their family, their friend, and the door starts to close a little bit. So I've, gone to work with guys and they seem like they'll, run through a brick wall to get sober or jump into a lake. And I meet them a week later and they don't have that motivation as much. Or 2 weeks later, especially a month. It usually lasts about a month. But if you get them through the steps and do it quickly. So also it's the way I do it is my grand sponsor was very much this way. He liked to get people on their 4-step within a week. And our sponsorship line that I'm involved with goes all the way back to Cleveland, which is early AA. They all have roots somewhere in New York and Cleveland, all sponsorship lines, if you trace them back. But this very straightforward was when the first 100, the guys who did this book, did the steps, they left detox with their amends list in their hands. And the detoxes back then were like, as soon as you could say your name, you went home. You weren't there for 6 or 7 days. And so you imagine what happens to us in detox. We're shaking and we'll do anything to get well. And some guy comes in there and says, I'm going to take you through the spiritual program. And that's what they did. So when I first sit down with a person, and let's say it's the first, here's what I do is I have these, I'm going to do it from a meeting perspective. I sponsor guys at rehab too, but it's a little bit different. So I see a guy, let's say I see Lee, I'm going to go up and give him my card and it says Steve Wood and big book quote on it and stuff. What's interesting is most people probably throw these away, but I've had people call me back 6 or 7 years later and say, hey, I'm calling you. I'm like, who are you? And well, you gave me your card. I'm like, well, I passed out thousands of these, but it's something you never know. But what I tell people is I give them my card. I say my number's on there. I want you to read doctor's opinion and call me. I call that a willingness test. Now, a lot of us already have that willingness test in some way or another. Sometimes it's just call me. And that's it, right? So when they do call me, it's still a potential. I don't, use the word sponsee much anymore. There's 4 aspects they mention in the big book for what a sponsee is. They call them a prospect, a protege, prospect, protege, and my brain's breaking up right now. But the other one they call them is a friend. So if you go from a protege to a friend, that's usually after 6 and 7. It kind of goes into that way, and define what a friend is, right? And I'm not big on the word sponsor because it seems like a financial thing, and it has the wrong meaning a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to say step guide because then I just told you what I'm there for. So I always start off on the title page just to introduce the big book. And that's where it says the story, how many thousand men and women have recovered. And what I tell the person I'm working with is I say story, and I explain what story means, but then I go and I say, now we're going to change that word to directions. The directions, how many thousand men and women have recovered, all of a sudden has a new meaning behind it. This book is filled with directions. So with step 1, and I heard someone say it earlier, the main thing I want a person to have is a first step experience. If you don't have that first step experience, it's not that you're going to go back out again, but there's a very good chance. But the first step experience can only come from knowing why we're powerless. And that's, of course, the allergy obsession. Because most people have never heard that before, and they've never heard it. They've never been told they're alcoholic. Well, a sponsor's not telling a person alcoholic, you decide for yourself, but they've never been talked about alcoholism from another alcoholic before. It's very unique, right? And you know, I always ask the guy, do you know why you're alcoholic? And they never get it right. You know, I drink too much. So what I start off with, I go to page 30. And I start off on page 30. This first step is probably gonna be the longest one, the most detailed I show you guys today. The rest of them I kind of breeze through, but I like to show this pretty as thorough as possible. So most paragraphs I'll read. But this one it's kind of like the one that I've done over the years, and I realized I was explaining most of the words anyways in this paragraph, so it's a good way to open-end it. And so what I say is most of us have been unwilling to admit we're real alcoholics. So I would underline real alcoholic. And no person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. So underline bodily, and you don't underline and, just underline bodily, mentally, right? And then, so therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been categorized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday he will control, underline the word control, and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. So there's 3 words to underline that sentence: control, obsession, abnormal, right? And I always tell this to the person I'm working with. I tell them from my own perspective. I don't tell them ever what they are. I tell them my own perspective. I say, you know, that my drinking was very similar to that sentence, but it was the idea that somehow I will control and enjoy my drinking while not drinking. And I could never do it because of this obsession. And they kind of like, I don't break down any words yet. I let the book do that. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing, and many pursue it to the gates of insanity. So underline illusion. All right, underline illusion. And then many pursue to the gates of insanity and death. So underline insanity, death. So just to read back those words again, in the paragraph, we've underlined real alcoholic, bodily, mentally different, obsession, control, obsession, abnormal drinker, illusion, insanity, death. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go on a journey to find out what those words mean. And so I said it to the guy, and at the same time, what we're doing is we're looking at it. So now we're going to go, we're going to, for the first word we're going to look at is real alcoholic. So let's go to page 20. So like I said, we're going to be jumping around quite a bit in the book. I may not have enough time to keep up with if a person gets behind, but page 20. So we're going to look at the 3 types of drinkers. This is what I do with the guys, because they never heard this before. And this is a real eye-opener. It says moderate drinkers have little trouble giving up liquor entirely. If they have a good reason for it, they can take it or leave it alone. So this person has a normal reaction to alcohol. 1 or 2 drinks, they do not go further. They're going to tell you how many drinks they're going to have. I'm going to have 2 drinks, and that's it. Right? They're not powerless, and they have human power. They have human aid. Then I go right to the next one. Then there's a certain type of hard drinker. That's you know, a heavy drinker or a drunk. He may have the habit bad enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. What that means is he gets drunk. He gets the typical drunk stuff. Physically, you know, he starts stumbling over himself. Mentally, he can't remember things. So I'm not talking about the allergy obsession. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. The average life expectancy of a real alcoholic is around 61. I mean, a hard drinker is around 61 years old. A real alcoholic for a male is around 49. For a female, it's around 44. Real alcoholic. I forget what I think the hard drinker for a woman is around 58 or something like that. It's right around the same time, 60 to 65. But these people, you know, if a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can stop or moderate. Although he might find it difficult and troublesome, may even need medical attention. So what I do with the individual and going to the step work is I do what's called a hard drinkers test, right? I do, well, and so I asked the guy I'm working with, did ill health ever stop you from drinking? Did falling in love ever stop you from drinking? Did change of environment ever stop you from drinking? Did warning of a doctor ever stop you from drinking? And most of the time they get straight A's on that. They get every question right. And that is nope, 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 nope. And I ask them, can you control your drinking? And it says, these people, they do not, once they start, they don't go on a run. They stop when they want to. And I don't give them what they are yet. I'm not explaining it to him what he is yet. I'm letting the book do this. And they're not powerless, they have human aid. So we go right to the next paragraph. Now I do a book study on this section. I spend 40 minutes on these three. So I don't do that with a sponsee because they're not going to know half the things I'm talking about. But what about the real alcoholic? And I say this every time, this is who this book is written for. He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control. There's that word control. So we figured out that word, all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. So mentally, does not respond to reason. The moderate drinker can stop for a good reason. The hard drinker can stop for a good reason, strong reason. Hard drinker, moderate drinker, good reason. Hard drinker, good reason. Strong reason. Real alcoholic does not respond to reason because they have a mental obsession, and that mental obsession is a reoccurring, persistent idea of drinking that does not respond to reason. So there's the mental part, and I ask them, "Do you understand that mental part?" Like, and I keep jabbing at them a little bit. Did this happen? Did you forget reason? Did you stop because of your kids? And they go, no, no, no. I said, we have a mental obsession. And the body's response for these real alcoholics is they lose all control of their consumption once they start to drink. I don't tell them what that is right away, because what we're going to do is we're going to look deeper into control, and we're going to go to XXVI and Docker's opinion. And it's a paragraph that says, we believe. This is the most important paragraph on step one. So this is, I call the diagnosis. And a diagnosis is used to determine and identify the nature of a cause of a problem. Like if you, go to the doctor and you're coughing, whatever, they got to give you a diagnosis, right? So it says, we believe, and so suggested, a few years ago, the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is the manifestation of an allergy. It's a sign of an allergy. Now, here's the thing is, my sponsor asked me if I knew what an allergy was. And I'm like, how could this be an allergy? I mean, I'm an alcoholic. I know what, there's no allergy. And I don't get, breakout hives or, and I said, get a dictionary. And I said, I know what an allergy is. He goes, no, you're an idiot. He goes, get a dictionary. Exactly of course he said to me in all love. And it said abnormal reaction to a substance. And he goes, do you have an abnormal reaction to alcohol? And I said, yeah. It was right there in my heart to say yes. And then it says that the phenomenon craving is limited in this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So now he throws us the curveball of what the allergy is, a phenomenon craving. And that craving, you hear that used word a lot in the rooms, like it's like kind of thrown up there with triggers. Oh, I'm craving alcohol. What you mean is you have an obsession. Craving is when you put it in your body. So craving is a powerful, uncontrollable desire for more. Phenomena means this is a doctor. He can tell you what it is, but he can't explain it. So the phenomenon craving is the abnormal reaction to alcohol or drugs after the first drink or use, leading the sufferer to crave for more, more, and more. Here's a good way to say it. We have no defense against the first drink because the obsession. And I have no defense against the second drink because of allergy, or the third drink, or the fourth drink, or the 12th drink. Right? So allergy, abnormal reaction to a substance. And so we're bodily different from our fellows. We have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, leading to craving for more. I have a mind that condemns me to drink against my will and a body that condemns me to death. I can't stop from starting. And when I start, I can't stop. And look what else it says. These allergic types. Here's one of the only warnings that Bill Wilson straight up gives us in this big book. Well, this is from the doctor. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Straight up warning. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence or reliance upon things human, their problems possibly become astonishingly difficult to solve. I am powerless because the allergy, craving for more once I start, and the obsession that brings me back to it, even though it goes against my best interest. And I have all the knowledge what it is. But this person is finally getting told by another person what it is. And look at the last sentence. Once having formed the habit, found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problem they become so difficult to solve. Do you see the unmanageability in that paragraph? Those last few sentences. Once having lost their self-confidence, unmanageability. Once having lost the reliance upon things human, their own human power, others' human power. Here's the unmanageability. Their problems pile up on them, and they become astonishingly difficult to solve. Is there a point? That's a great way to point out unmanageability. And this is a good way to look at it. If you're not in control of your drinking when you start, if you're no control picking up the first drink, you cannot control your life. Life's unmanageable. I also explained the unmanageability when you're going dry, that restless, irritable, discontent feeling when you want to get well, but you're angry at the world. You have high anxiety, easily pissed off and not satisfied. That's another form of unmanageability. So the question I ask the sponsees are, I ask them, are you successful at managing your life? Are you successful at running your life or controlling your life? I leave it right there. I'm not there to tell them anything about God or 4 through 9 yet. Planting seeds. I go to the next paragraph down. I'm not going to read it all, but it's 2 paragraphs down, the cycle of drinking. And that's the men and women drink essentially because of the effect produced by alcohol. There's not a lot to read there as far as doing it right here, but the one thing I mentioned, there's a cycle of drinking. And this is where I bring my experience in there. And I bring my experience in there with just what the paragraph says. It doesn't say in the paragraph we get out of jail. For me, I got out of jail and I have desire to drink, and I would drink. The obsession to drink, put it in my body. The allergy kicks in, I go on a run. I make a firm resolution not to drink again. I go to AA and CA and whatever else there is, church maybe, wherever else I might go to shrink. But I'm not going to do the steps. So my mind is still bad. I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. And eventually I'm gonna fall to that desire again. That's the cycle of drinking over and over again. Eventually becomes an endless cycle where there's no stoppage. So the very end of that paragraph, this is where I start planting seeds for 4 through 9. At the end of the paragraph, it says, this is repeated over and over again. Repeat over and over again, the allergy obsession, unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's little hope of recovery. So the book, entire means complete. It's like rigorous honesty, complete honesty, right? And the thing is, I explained to them that I can go to church, have a psychic change. I can get a new girlfriend and have a psychic change. I could have children have a psychic change, but not an entire psychic change. 4 through 9 is the only entire psychic change I mean. And what it does, 4 through 9, in a psychic change, it produces a radical change to our thinking, radical. And when our thinking changes, our beliefs start to change. And when our beliefs change, our desires change. And when those desires change, our desire to drink disappears. Obsession gone. I leave it at that. I don't go any further, explain them what that is. Let them ponder on it. So what I do from this paragraph on is, from this step one, is I go back to 21 and I read the paragraph right underneath the real alcoholic. And that's where it says, here's this fellows and puzzling you. I call it the Jekyll and Hyde paragraph. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but it really gets into, you might give them morphine. I just read it to them. Now I break it down in books today, I break it down sentence by sentence by sentence. With a sponsee, they're not going to understand really what I'm talking about, breaking it down and explaining who Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde was, and Richard Louis Stevens was, and all that wrote that story. I just break it down and let them, and they go, that's me, that's me, that's me. It really sinks in well. It really sinks in well. So what I do after that paragraph is, and this is, everything we've covered so far, mixed in with the paragraphs and a little bit of commentary, is about 45 minutes to an hour already. Not here, but within a sponsee, because you got to put in questions, you got to make sure they're understanding it. But I've really never really had a bad experience on step one with this aspect, doing it like this. So I review those words again. I go, let's go back and look at those words. I just say them off the top of my head, like Rockaholic. I said, we found out as a drinker who does not respond to reason from the obsession and experiences phenomenal craving once he starts to drink. Vitally different is the abnormal reaction to alcohol with the first drink, leading craving for more. Mentally different is the occurring persistent idea of drinking does not respond to reason. Control, we already kind of saw that, the power and ability to control is the power and ability to influence or stop a course of events. Do you have control? I ask them, and they go, no. And the obsession, the same as mentally. The illusion is, we didn't really cover that, but I explained to them because it's important. I say the illusion is a false perception of reality. And I go, you know what that false perception is? And they go, I don't know. I said, your false perception is that you can beat this game on your own. And how many times have you tried? And I let them tell me how many different ways they've tried. And I don't tell them do the steps. I just let them do it. And abnormal, and then I mentioned abnormal is away from normal. And insanity is incomplete or not whole. Is incomplete or not whole. Something's missing in me. It's not crazy. Crazy means full of cracks. Insanity can be, the best way I explain to people, the newcomers, what insanity means, if you take like a pizza pie, right? Take a pizza. And let's say we have two of them. And I take a piece out of one, it's no longer whole, but I can take a piece out of the other one and make it whole again. It's kind of like that with ourselves. There's a part of us that's missing, but we don't get that till later. Death is not being buried in the ground. Death is the cycle of drinking I mentioned. Death is is being trapped in an allergy obsession. Anyone that truly has the allergy obsession knows what that death is. And then to truly give the first step experience, I go to page 30. And this is where I take step one with them. And I say I take it with them because I believe I'm taking it with them as well, in a sense. It says, we learned we had to fully, look at that word fully, it's just like complete, right? Just like entire, fully concede in our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. So fully tells me that I need to do this 100%. 100% is how we look at step one. It can't be done 80%. And some in the fellowship, they think we're talking about abstinence. They're talking about, we want no lurking notion that one day you can beat this on your own, right? It says we're alcoholics. This is the first step of recovery. The delusion like we're other people presently maybe has to be smashed. And look at that last word, smashed. You must crush the aspect that you're like other people. And pride's a hard thing to let go of. So another word for concede is surrender. And I'm big on the word surrender because it means to give up or stop fighting, admit defeat. You know, giving up the rights to what has conquered you. Innermost is a very deep word, and I'm gonna the innermost of our being. So the innermost of the ocean would be like the most beautiful part, the abyss. The abyss is the most beautiful part, right? And the most beautiful part of a human and innermost of a human would be the heart. Not the beating heart, but the heart, the whole heart section, like the heart chakra type thing. Now, I don't explain that to them because they don't understand what I'm talking about, but what I'm actually doing is planting seeds for the second step. And because we're going to look at second step where God is, and I just asked them, I want you to surrender to your innermost self. So they're asking us to fully surrender to innermost selves at Rockaholics. In order to surrender and do something as deep as surrender to innermost selves, we need to know what alcoholic is. Thanks to what we covered, we know. And what I do next is I leave them alone for a few minutes. I go, I want you to take that question in. Do you fully consider yourself your alcoholic? I leave them alone and in silence. But then I ask them a few questions before that. I'll go slow on these questions. I know some people might want to write them down. So I say, do you relate with the allergy and obsession from actual experience? Do you relate with the allergy obsession from actual experience? Do you believe it is a hopeless condition? Do you believe it is a hopeless condition? Do you believe human power has failed you? Do you believe you are powerless over alcohol, drugs, whatever? Do you believe your life is unmanageable? And then the step one question, do you fully surrender to your innermost self, your alcoholic? And I tell them, after they say yes, you completed step one. That's, I believe, is a solid first step experience. And most importantly, I set the date to do step two. And the one thing I'm going to tell you is I do 2 and 3 together with people because I've had much more luck explaining step 2 and 62 and 63. And that's it, because it's just a decision. But you'll see what I mean. And it doesn't give them time to think. And like I said, I like them. So what I do is when I set that date, I say, can you meet tomorrow? Or what's good for you? And usually I don't like to have it 3 or 4 days away, but that's just, you know, I'm not going to say in a week. I'm hoping they meet me tomorrow. So I'm going to look at this. So I sometimes break two and 3 up, but rarely anymore at all. So step 2, I start on page 44 and I'm not going to read all these pages, but I read from 44 to 45. You know, read from the top, 44 all the way down. Maybe ask a few questions where it says, you know, you think you have a little control of the amount you take and all that stuff, you know, remind them what they are. But then I'm going to read all the way to it says on 45, lack of power. So this is the most important. This is the bread and butter of step 2 right here. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. It had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously, but where and how do we find this power? So this is the deep stuff. Where and how do we find the power? Location and method. The location of the power and the method we use to get there. So this again, I'm planting seeds for 4 through 9. So for how we find the power, I go to page 25. And I'm not going to read the paragraph, but it's the first paragraph where it says here, you know, most of us have been did not like the self-searching, the leveling of pride, all that. So when I say self-searching, I say that sounds like step 4. Put your steps next to each one of those sentences. The, you know, the leveling of our pride, that could be 4 through 9. And I don't say what they are. You know, here I'm simply just pointing out what steps are where, and there's no wrong way to do it. was planting seeds. And I look at them, I say, how you find the power is just 4 through 9. And I'm not going to give them any definitions of what they are. The less I say about it, the better, because it creates fear. And if they'll bring it up. They'll say, I don't, I'm kind of scared of the step 4 thing. And I say, you know what? Talk to me about that. You do step 3. You see, and I explain about the care of God later. But so where we find the power is 55. And this is like kind of like my big step right here. I'm not going to read this whole page, but I'm going to show you the main stuff I cover in this paragraph. I cover the whole paragraph. I read the whole page. And I do little talking on this. I do explain to them how I grew up Catholic and how this changed my idea. But I also like to know what they are a little bit. I mean, I don't want to offend people. But I explain a little bit about my upbringing, like I said, but I let the book do the talking. And I read the whole page and with a strong emphasis on the bottom. And then there's a sentence in there and towards the middle it says, we finally saw that faith in some kind of God is a part of our makeup just as much as feelings we have for a friend. Well, that part right there, much as the feelings we have for a friend, I asked my sponsor, what my sponsor asked me, I want you to list what a friend is. What do you look for in a friend? And I was like, someone that's got my back, someone that I can trust, someone who doesn't, throw me to the cops or whatever, I had all these things I said, that's loyal, honest. And he threw a bunch in there really spiritual. And he says, you're never going to find this friend. But I think what you're describing could possibly be God's will. And I went, whoa. And I went keep reading, and then I get to where God is. We found the great reality is deep down within us. We found the great reality deep down within us. And in the last analysis, it's only there where he may be found. So where's God? Within us. So this is actually, at the same, effect on everybody. Either they're speechless or they're blown away, but it gets, it helps with their reality. It's the essence of step 2. It gives them hope right here. And then from there, I go to 52. And I read the bedevilment. So I just explained to them that how they get to God is 4 through 9. Where God is within you. And I explained to them a lot about that. Consciousness, that, you thought you were doing things bad before. What was telling you that? And kind of chip away at it a little bit. If I read the bedevilments on 52, I'm not going to read those, but that's, we have problems with personal relationships. I don't describe those at all. I ask them at the bottom, does that resemble you? And they go, yes. And then I go 1 page over to 53. And this is a really important paragraph for step 2. It says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis. And I always tell them, it wasn't your upbringing. It wasn't other people's faults. It's a self-imposed crisis. We cannot postpone or evade. There's a timeline. Don't waste your time here. We had to fearlessly face the proposition either that God is everything or else he's nothing. Now I go back and ask them what fearlessly means. Fearlessly does not mean you're fearless or have no fear. Fearlessly means you walk through fear. And you do that by facing a proposition that maybe some of us are afraid to ask because the way we were raised or whatever. God either is everything or he's nothing. There's no middle ground there. God either is or isn't. There is no middle ground. What was our choice to be? I ask, are you willing to make the choice that God is everything or he's nothing? I used to always ask, are you willing to make the choice that God is everything? But then I also need to ask the choice nothing, because I want to, if they say, no, I'm not willing to everything, then I say, well, then you're saying he's nothing. God's nothing. And let's make them think. There's quite a bit of, this is where a conversation might happen. So then I go to 47, and this is where I take the step. First, I read this paragraph, and then I got questions for them. Excuse me. We need to ask ourselves, but in the middle of the page, we need to ask ourselves one short question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe that there's a power greater than myself? And I ask them that question. Well, I don't ask them that question yet. As soon as a man says he does believe or is willing to believe, and in fact, we assure him he is on his way. So I'm going to ask him that as a question, but I'm going to ask him other questions first. And what I ask him is, are you open-minded to finding a power greater than yourself? Are you willing to take action to find that power? Do you believe or willing to believe in a power greater than yourself? As soon as a person can say they believe or is willing to believe, we share them they're on its way. You've completed step 2. So I go right into step 3. I don't necessarily do the ABCs and all that with them because we just already covered all that. If it is step 3 and it's separate, then I'll do that, but rarely anymore. So I go right to page 62. And this is the reason I did it like this was because it's the way I did it. My grad sponsor did step 2 with me with about 8 other guys, and he did 62 and 63 straight through, and then have us all did 3rd step prayers. And that's just the way I was kind of raised in AA to do it that way. So 62, I explained to him what the root of our trouble is. Selfish centeredness is the root of our trouble, and how the root is what's underground that people don't see. And I read the rest of the page. Here's you got to quit playing. That's the thing that's very important there is to understand what they're saying there, to really understand what they're saying. And 63, I read the 3rd step promises and I don't really explain them. I explained that the care of God is from, God will provide for us if we get close to him from his work well. Provided, that means if I put God first, others second, my needs get met. And they have no idea a lot of times what I'm talking about, but sometimes they do, but they never forget me saying that, because I never forget my sponsor saying that to me. But provided, God's the provider, we keep close to him by doing 4 through 9, eventually in step 10, 4 through 9 and 11. And I perform his work well by sponsoring others to doing what I'm doing with you, right? And before I even do the 3rd step prayer, I read with them the sentence that is right below the 3rd step prayer. And it's where it says, we thought well before taking this step, making sure we're ready. And I asked them, are you ready? It's very important. You could have abandoned yourselves utterly to him. And what I do then is, before we do the 3rd step prayer, I go to page 64, top of the page, and it's the 3rd step warning. It's very important. It's as though our decision, that's step 3, was a vital and crucial step. It could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort, step 4, to face step 5, to be rid of 6 and 7, the things in ourselves that are blocking us. And I ask them, what do you think it's blocking you from? Well, a lot of times they say, I guess you're talking about God. So I tell them, by removing this stuff inside you and taking the action to remove it, you'd be surprised what you might find. I want them to have just like I want them to have a 1st step experience, and that happens with the Algebra session. There's a 2nd step experience, and that's where God's, God's within us. And the 3rd step experience is doing the 3rd step prayer on the knees. And it's very important. And the 3rd step questions I ask them are from some of the stuff we read, is, are you convinced? I ask them everything that we covered so far smashed together. Are you convinced you're an alcoholic? They're all convinced questions. Are you convinced you cannot manage your own life? So like ABC stuff. Are you convinced no human power can relieve your alcoholism? Are you convinced that God could and would if he were sought? Are you convinced you need to quit playing God? Are you convinced you cannot get rid of self entirely without God's help? And I ask them a question that's not really out of the book, but are you ready to give up control? to the care of God? Are you ready to abandon yourselves utterly to him? And then we do the third step prayer. And that's, like I said, I prefer to do it at a place where we can do it on our knees, or the person's comfortable. Just the way I am. And I look at it as a very sacred thing, the third step prayer. The other thing I tell them, I want them to start saying this third step prayer when they wake up every day, and then at night, and have it memorized, because I want them to start getting used to those times for step 11. And what I do, as soon as they do the third step prayer, I give them the 4-step packet, and I have them write down a resentment. It doesn't matter if they, mark all the other stuff on there yet, just who they resent and why. And I look at them right in the eyes and I say, you just turned your whole life over to care of God. You went from decision to action. And I tell them, now we want to get results, right? And I tell them to start filling it out. And I also tell them to work on that in the morning when they awake, and at night and during the day, to get used to that. For step 4, I'm just going to run through the paragraphs. I'm not going to, it'll be here all day, but I'm just going to, I read. So what I do is they got the packet. So I set a date to meet them a couple days later. I go, I show them how to write resentment inventory, and that's it. And we meet a couple of days later, usually 1 or 2 days later, and I show them how to fill out the rest. And I like to go over step 4. So what I do is, I go over 64, I read page 64 to 67, how to write inventory, the definite example and all that. And then I go over fear from 67 and 68. And I go over sex conduct from 68 to 70. And one thing I really push for them is to work on the 4th step again in the morning, at night. And then we set a date for step 5. I don't do it 2 weeks out. I've done it before, and it's a big mistake. I usually give them from 6 to 8 days. 6 to 8 days. And I don't really have too many people that ever call me up and say I need more time. I usually get it done. Or they don't do it at all. So the ball's in their court. I don't call them every day and check on them, see how they're doing. What's important here is to not be threatening with the date. Some sponsors say, if you don't get this date, you're fired, or you don't get this 5th step done, you're fired. That's not my style. So for the 5th step, the entry level to the 5th step is, before we start going over stuff, I always go to page 75. On page 75, this is great to do before the 5th step. It says, when we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. I explained to them, I said, there's a time frame right there. You don't want to waste time once you're done writing. We've written an inventory and prepared for a long talk. And I explained to them, this is not going to be a 2-hour talk in the back of Starbucks, And then this is the question. This is the big one. We explained to our partner what we're about to do and why we have to do it. For what we're about to do, we're going to go to page 72. Page 72. And for page 72, it says we're trying to get a new attitude and a new relationship with our Creator and discover the obstacles in our path. That's what we're about to do. I explained to them the attitude is our viewpoint towards something we like or dislike. And that relationship is about being connected. Relationship means it's a state of being connected. But the key is the word new. It says a new attitude and a new relationship with God. So what's it saying about our old one? Whether we have one or not, we need a new one, right? It's not about throwing the old one away or disregarding it, but we must discover the obstacles in our path, it says as well. All obstacles that stand between us and progress. Anything, any obstacle. If you want freedom, you want to remove the obstacles. And that's what we're doing today. So I explained to them. And I'm very vague here. I don't want to give anything away. I don't want to think I need to. A lot of people make mistakes on 5 here that they got to make sure the sponsee understands everything. They don't need to understand. They don't need to understand the steps. They just need to do them. Right. And this is going to be a magic session to let them figure it out. Because otherwise, you don't want to create expectations. Why we have to do it's on the bottom of 72. If we skip this final step, we may not overcome our drinking. I don't even say anything back that up. I go back to 75 and I say something very important to them. I read something and say something very important. So you should realize we're engaged in a life or death, Aaron. I said, this is life or death. Don't forget that. Right? Most people approaching this way will be glad to help. They get honored by. I tell the guy, I'm honored to hear your fifth step. I'm honored. The average. Hold on one second. Back to our program. I had to tell my kids to be quiet. So the average fifth step I hear is about 6 hours long. I've heard some 3 hours. I've heard some 12 hours. There's no time frame. Remember what the book says. We'll not try to change the plan. That's the first learner's plan. I've heard big time speakers who people love to listen to say, I hear their resentments and I hear enough. That's the biggest bunch of bullshit I've ever heard, because I'm going to go through the resentments. I want to hear every single one. Every single one is different. Every single one is a different story. Those instincts have a different story with each one. I also, don't say, I don't break it up anymore and do it the next day. I don't like to do that because I've gotten trapped before doing that. All of a sudden the guy goes, well, I'm going to go over this one with you before we stop. And they go over with me. He's crying. I can't leave that guy alone. And I also, there's other ways to change the plan is a lot of sponsors will tell the person just to write down who they resent and why. And then as far as the instincts goes, third column and the fourth column, we'll do that together. So I'm going to tell you what you're like. No, I want to know what you're like. That's a self-appraisal. So once they do the fifth step, we conclude it with the promises on 75. And there's only one I comment on because they're getting ready to do that hour. It says we can be at long peace and ease. And I look at them right in the eyes and say, you can be by yourself and never be alone again. Let them draw the conclusion to that. I explain the hour. Now, the way I do the hour is, again, this is my experience. This is the way that, your way might be different, and it's not saying my way's better or anything like that, or it's the right way. The way my grand sponsor explained to me and took me through it, same way Joe and Charlie did it. And that is, you have the questions on 75, and then it says, once you answer the questions, the next page, 76, says, if you can answer to those questions, well, you should be able to answer those questions within that hour. You go right to 6 and 7. So 6 and 7 happens in the hour. And the one thing I do is I familiarize them with a 7-step prayer. So, and I one thing I've always done with them too is before they go in their hour, if we drop like a mock 8-step list, I have them write down all their resentments and harms and fears and stuff. I mean, not fears, but sex conduct of names, just so they can separate all that for now. And also some people are multiple times, just give them down to ones, and I ask them to look that over in that hour. These are all the people you hurt, right? And I suggest them to make amends to the first person you see after you do that hour. And tell them how to make the amends. And then call me. I want to know how your day's going. I explain to them, now you know how to do 10, but we still meet maybe a few days later. So what I do with them is, let's say I hear the fifth step on Friday. Then the following Friday, we're going to get together and make the 8-step list. The following Friday, I'm going to get together and explain to them step 10. Maybe here's some step 10. The following Friday, step 11. Actually, I do 10, 11 together. And then following Friday, I'm explaining them 12. That's eventually going to be our meeting day for step 10. I'll explain that in a minute. So we meet for step 8 if they're setting a date, meet a week later, and we go over that list. And And it says on page 83, I read the last paragraph on there, explains how we make amends and who we make the 4 different types. I explain them as willing, unwilling, creditors, and those people cannot be seen. And then I read the promises on 83, 84. I don't go much over step 9 because it tends to intimidate them a lot. But we will eventually go over it, or they go to the book studies. The thing is I set a date to go over, 10, 11. It's usually a week later, the same day as before. Bring your amends packet with you. Bring your 10s, bring any inventory you've written down. This is where I give them the 10 and 11 step packet. And the 11 step part of it's just directions. We open with prayer. I ask them how they're doing. And this is the way this is where I'm planting seeds, is how we're going to meet every week. I open with prayer. I ask them how they're doing. Let me see your amends list. What amends did you make this week? And you got any 10-step stuff to go over? And I show them the 10-step packet then for the first time. So with step 10, I'm asking to put down the simplest things at the beginning. Oh, my car broke down the other day. The guy cut me off and flipped me off. I'm driving down the road. The simplest little things. And I'll explain why. And I'll give you an example of a sponsee of mine. A sponsee of mine, I don't really have to sponsor them, because now they're just like, they just do the work without question. But what I discovered is this, and it's very interesting. What I discovered is that, like with this guy, is he wrote down all these little things, and sometimes they're monotonous, sometimes they're valid. But what happens is, then like this sponsee broke his ankle. Now he can't work. He might lose his job because someone might take it. All these he had like 6 real fears. And I look at him, I say, now you realize why you're writing down the little things? Because now if you write down the little things and write down all the time, you start to understand the instincts. And something big comes up, you get it right away. That's what it's about. And the thing is that's what my experience was as well. It's the way my sponsor took me through it. I go over the 11-step packet, and I go over the morning, the awakening at night from 85 to 88. And they're already using that time for meditation and for prayer and, inventory time and stuff. And I said, if you want to get more into meditation, go to YouTube and watch some videos. Here, I'll suggest a book maybe. But I don't push it on them. They let them ask me. I set a date to go over 12. And so again, I asked him, how's your amends going and all that? And with 12, I kind of just hit the bullet points of the book, title page, forward to the first edition, doctor's opinion, Bill's story, just little parts of it, talk about sponsorship. And then of course, chapter 7. And after they make a handful of amends, it might even be by that time, maybe they made 8 or 9, I tell them to start sponsoring. There's nothing, sponsor as quickly as you can, because that's how you understand the steps. You don't understand the steps fully until you sponsor. And so then we meet on a weekly basis, and it's like, again, opening with prayer, maybe read a devotional. How's your 10 step? You got some 10-step stuff for me? How's your amends coming along? How's your step 11? How's life? And I ask some questions too. How's sponsorship going? How do you think you did this week? I ask them, is there anything you could have done better? Read the book of your choice. I ask them, you have a book you want to read out of, like a 24-hour book? They always have those. And then we close with prayer of his choice. The thing is people think I'm adding more to what's been. Actually, the more stuff I realized was getting in the way, such as going too slow and line by line to the book. Nothing against that. If you do that, I'm not saying it's bad. From my experience, but we're dealing with life and death and awakening. And this might be their only chance. Get them through this. I like to get them through the steps as quick as possible, because they're going to have a lifetime to grow with them and understand them. And they won't fully understand them right away. If I don't do the steps this way, I wouldn't be here right now. I can tell you that for myself. I basically was on step 9 within 3 weeks. And some people say that's short. I'm sorry, that's too slow. But after making a handful of amends, I dedicated myself 10, 11, 12. And, and here's the thing is, I had 60 days in rehab. I got out of rehab and I hid from everyone for 2 weeks because I thought everybody was after me still. And then I started going to meetings, and around 90 days, I got a sponsor because I was going to drink. And at 4 months of sobriety, I was 4 or 5 months I was sponsoring. I say 4 months. I was ridiculed by old timers. What I was doing was wrong. I went into a clean and sober house, and I said, I went there at 8 months. And I said, I sponsor. I said, oh, I have a sponsor. And wrote them down. They're like, oh yeah, you got the big book guy. And then I said, and I sponsor too. They said, you can't sponsor. You don't have a year. He said, you can't live here if you sponsor. And I said, oh, can I have my money back? They did, because I was not messing around anymore. In the past, I would look at that as an excuse not to sponsor. But that's just the way it was. I've never looked back, and I mellowed over the years. For my first 7 years, I was very outspoken in the fellowship, and not everybody liked me. And now I think some people, a few of them like me now. But if you look up the word altruism in the dictionary, it says practical practice of selfless concern for the well-being of another person. That altruism and compassion are just two characteristics of being, just taking someone to the steps and being spiritually awake. And the problem with recovery today, there's so many ideas what recovery is, and lots of other ideas come from the clinical side. Do not sponsor for a year or or longer. Most of those people never sponsor to begin with. From a medical standpoint, altruism does not look at it as an appropriate treatment for alcoholism. A lot of people would laugh at that. The medical side. But nothing is further from the truth. For this program to be effective, it requires for us to take another alcoholic through these steps for long-term recovery. So when a person relaxes and says, I'm doing the program, but not sponsoring, I know why they relapse. I hate to say that, but 10, 11, 12 is effective for long-term recovery and being recovered. So this is about freely giving yourselves to another person to save us as well. The spirit of love and tolerance or altruism is something we must carry with us at all times, demonstrating principles in all our affairs. Before I do the steps, it was all about me and rarely thought about helping other people. I would complain how poorly life was treating me, and it was completely self-centered. I'm a victim, no way out. And I'll be honest with you, when I first walked into AA, I thought all those who talked about the steps were just do-gooders. They're already that way. They're not tough like me, or and they did for attention. I thought, eventually I saw a part in those do-gooders I wanted, and then I got to know them. I realized they were just like me, but not the same. I didn't think people could change. But I never forgot what a friend of mine, Kyle, who passed away a few years ago, he was the one who introduced me to the big book. He told me it's all about service. Service is everything. And what a better way of helping another is to pass on this process. There's no way better. There's no special training you need to be a sponsor. Just walking up that and offering yourself to someone. You got the book. All I know is the program recovery is not intended for us to do on our own. The core of the program is the backbone of recovery. And that's how it all started. And AA could never refund me from what they'd given me. So I'm going to stop right there.